The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot is a novel that should not be judged based on its cover. A book based on science is usually not appealing to people of my age, but I have enjoyed this book from beginning to end. Not only does it explain the story of Henrietta Lacks and her cells, but it incorporates the issues of racism and the experiences of the Lacks family. Each chapter has a different story that will allow you to fully understand HeLa cells and the story behind it. HeLa cells have done so much for science, yet the person was never recognized, which is shown by Skloot. Overall, Skloot opens eyes to the cruelty towards the Lacks family and explains how the HeLa cells have affected science and her family. Henrietta Lacks was in her 30s when she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. An issue of racism was present at Johns Hopkins, as they were known to perform racist practices on African Americans at the time. Without Henrietta's permission, George Gay used Henrietta for her cancerous cells. He was trying to create an immortal cell line. Henrietta's cells weren't only living after long periods of time, but they were growing, and growing fast. Gay decides to send out millions of tubes of her multiplying cells to labs around the country, which were used in major medical discoveries like the polio vaccine and understanding the human chromosome. On the other side, the Lacks family had no idea of what was going on with their cells, but were very hostile to people who called about the HeLa cells. They didn't even know those cells were still alive, and they had no understanding of HeLa cells. When they got a hold of this, they were furious and felt exploited because they were living in poverty while others were profiting. This book is relevant to biology because it deals with the topic of genetics. It explains how they needed genetic technology to find the cause of the aggressive multiplication of Henrietta's cells. In order to figure out how the HeLa cells lived on for so long, they needed to know what caused the cervical cancer. For example, the virologist who studies parasitic particles of genetic material, or viruses, discovered the cause, which was HPV-18. He studied genetic material to give more information about the cancerous cells that are immortal. I learned that the medical field has advanced greatly in the last 6 decades. It was common for the diagnosis to be wrong, and Henrietta's cervical cancer was misdiagnosed. Also, ethics was not as important as it is now. African Americans were given poor treatment and were usually taken advantage of. Gay thought it was fine to take her cells without her consent, which would not be okay today. This novel is an eye-opener as it shows us the discrimination and racism the Lacks family have to endure. It was unfair for others to benefit from the HeLa cells, yet her own family made no money off of it, despite the fact they are the ones in poverty. They were also kept in the dark about what was happening to her cells, and were not properly educated when they found out, as they thought she was still alive. A new perspective was shown to me from this book. The Lacks family constantly thought that Henrietta was in the cells as a spiritual form. Most people would think this was crazy, but this is all they know. They don't know anything about the scientific facts. They only know about the Bible. This causes the readers to think about how our reasoning for anything is based on what we know. The scientists have the knowledge and research to know what actually happened to her. Henrietta's family only knew about Christianity, so that's what they based everything on. I recommend this book to people who are interested in ethical topics, as it is very well-rounded and not solely based on the science behind the HeLa cells. Most people are not very interested in scientific books, and this book talks about the emotional experiences of the family by explaining how her cells were used for the benefit of others and how this affected their lives. She wanted to show the readers that there is a story behind the HeLa cells, and there are people who are tied to them. To fully understand the HeLa cells, you need to know the background information. Do not judge a book based on its cover or title, because the book is far from what it seems.